Professor K here, and today we're going to talk about how to create overlaps in CSS. This is a really frequent question I've been getting in class, so I figured I'd go over it in a little bit more detail. The first thing that we need to do is determine what kind of positioning we want. With positioning, things behave just a little bit differently, and we really choose the positioning we want based on how we want the space of the element we are positioning to interact with the rest of the CSS. So let's take a look here. We have this circle and we have images here. And what we want is to get this circle, and I'm just going to draw kind of what I want things to look like here. We want this circle to show up right about here. So like right there. That's where it would be best to have that circle show up. And when we do that, we do not want the space between here and here. We want that to move up. So how do we do that? Well, what we need to do is we need to think about which positioning items will work best with that. So with position relative, I'm going to focus on my circle here. Let's try position relative. And what I'm going to do actually is just show my screen brush here. And I'm going to keep it on so that you can see the space and how this is working. So let's use a rectangle here. And this is the space that this is taking up. So when we position this, relatively, and let's say that we want it to go from the top 100 pixels, see how, we'll even do like 50 pixels so it's a little easier to see. Notice how over here, the space that originally took up stays the same, but the circle has moved. That's what position relative does. It leaves the space behind and just moves this circle relative to that original space. However, we also have one other positioning type, absolute. Absolute says I'm going to position myself kind of anywhere, and I don't really care about what's going on around me. I don't care what other people are doing. I'm not going to leave my space behind. So let's try position absolute and see what happens there. Did you see what happened? Notice how this all scooted up, and this square here is no longer taking up space. The circle is no longer taking up space, and that means that what is happening is that this has now, moved up because that element is no longer taking up space. So for the desired result, our best, what we want to do here is we do want to use position absolute. Now, one thing that might happen when you use position absolute is that you might find that it's positioning to the very top of the page. So let's see this. You might find that when you use position absolute, it's going like shooting straight up the page, or it's disappearing. I actually have another video on that. Check that out if you are having that problem. It's called like help my element disappeared. What you need to do to fix this is to determine what element on the page you want this to have a relationship with. So let's take a look at the elements in our page. We're just going to head to freeze mode here, and I want this circle here, I want it to have a relationship, and let me just get this showing. I want it to have a relationship with images. This is where I want that relationship to be. So how do I tell CSS what the relationship is? I have to say that this H2 has a position relative. That's really important. That creates the relationship. The other thing that I need to do is make sure that this is actually, and let me just scoot this over here so it's a little bit easier for you to see, that this circle is inside of that relationship. So let's just create that relationship. Here we have an H2 of images. And in order for the relationship to happen, this needs to be inside. Check that out. This is getting much closer. So now we have the circle inside of our H2. The reason why this is so important is because anything you absolutely position, it's looking up to the parent element to see whether or not it should position to that. So that's why the position relative is so important. So getting back to here, we know we want position absolute. If we had position relative, again, that would make this way too tall. So that would not be the right choice here. Let's position this absolutely so that this circle no longer takes up space. And then we're going to play with a top position. And again, we're positioning to this green line now because of this position relative. As long as this is here and as long as circle is inside of H2, we're going to be in good shape. Let's try, since 0 is the top and the circle is already positioned to the top, let's try a negative value here, negative 10 pixels. Now we can see that's starting to move up. And you can just play around with this until you get the desired effect. Here, negative 50 pixels gets it overlapped just about there. And we wanted it about halfway and then somewhere over here. So we're also going to need a left value. The left value is going to go from this side. Let's add a position of left. And again, we're just going to eyeball it. Let's do 100 pixels. See how that goes. Not far enough yet. Let's do 200. Much better. So there you go. That's how you're going to position and create an overlap in your CSS. So key things to remember. Make sure that you've determined what the relationship is and that your HTML is structured using that relationship. So here, the relationship is the circle should overlap the H2. The H2 is in green here. And the circle has to be inside for that relationship to happen. Then in your CSS, make sure the parent item has a position relative. That's what creates sort of this like relationship here. Finally, in order to not have this show any extra space, you're going to use position absolute. So I hope these things help you out. I'm going to follow up with a quick video on an alternate way of how you could do this in just a moment. I'll see you later.